A suspended Florida attorney is now accused of murdering his father, a prominent Boca Raton attorney. This after he allegedly stole thousands of dollars from a family trust fund.
What prosecutors will be looking at is the weight of the evidence. So the investigation is still ongoing.
On July 3rd, 34-year-old Brandon Labiner was charged with premeditated first-degree murder with a firearm. According to a release by the Boca Raton Police Department, a family member discovered the victim at about 4:30 p.m. on Saturday, July 1st. He had been shot 4 times and died on the scene. Former Florida prosecutor Melba Pearson tells Law&Crime Network the investigation is still in the early stages. So early, officials haven't publicly released the victim's name.
My first instinct when I read this was, I have a funny feeling it's the dad. that was just a gut instinct in reading the facts and all of that, and knowing that there was an allegation that he may have stolen money from his father's trust account. So the setup is there that it could be possible that it was the father. And so I guess it's a matter of, do the family members know? Have an official identification been made as of yet? All of those things are possibly what's playing into why we don't have the name of the victim yet.
The victim's family evoked Marsy's Law, which, as Pearson explains, is a privacy law protecting their identity. However, the victim is widely reported as Paul Labiner, the father of his suspected killer.
Florida is very interesting in terms of its stance around privacy and all of that. Now, at the end of the day, the family may be concerned around questions of safety. They could be concerned around issues of reputation. Again, they may want just for this to play out in the court of law and not in the court of public opinion, right? They don't want necessarily all their neighbors, everybody knowing their business. But at the same token, with all that being said, the victim is deceased. So it's not like the victim is going to have necessarily damage to their reputation because, again, they're no longer with us. It's different than if you are a surviving victim and you don't want everyone to know, or again, you're afraid of being intimidated. So for instance, let's say, it was a complete stranger and, there's concerns that, let's say the stranger survived, but they're afraid because they have a number of business dealings that this defendant was a part of, as well as other people, and they're worried about their reputation within the business community or something like that. There could be an argument to be made there. Or again, if this is, some sort of gang affiliated type of issue or a mob type situation, again, you may not want your information out there because you're afraid that the gang members would retaliate or call you and say, don't testify, or threaten family members or things of that nature. I don't really see that playing out here.
In the years leading up to the murder, Brandon Labiner worked alongside his father at the law offices of Paul Labiner. The practice's website states Brandon Labiner worked as an estate planning attorney, representing, quote, individuals and families with their drafting needs and administration of revocable and irrevocable trusts. The site boasts Labiner's strong history with degrees from the University of Florida and Nova Southeastern University. But things went south for Brandon Labiner in 2022 when his father accused him of stealing nearly $500,000 from a spousal trust fund. Brandon Labiner was a trustee on that account. In September of last year, Paul Labiner sued his son for $30,000. Court documents refer to Brandon Labiner's, quote, poor work ethic and subpar performance as a plaintiff's attorney. His father argued that work ethic caused him to lose out on viable cases.
If this was a business dispute and let's say court proceedings started and next week there was supposed to be a hearing or a trial on the theft of the money from the trust account, are you now killing your father because you don't want this to go to trial? So again, that plays into the intent and the reason why this crime happened. So all of this would be fair game at trial as part of the evidence the prosecution would be presenting to show that the defendant is guilty and why he did what he did on that day and the time factor of why he did it at that particular time. But here you have a concrete connection in terms of you have the amount of money that was taken from the account. You have the fact that the father took action. what was going to be the result of that action? What was the timeline? All of that is going to be critical for trial.
In April of this year, Brandon Labener's law license was suspended. Just one day before the shooting, he petitioned the Florida bar to have his membership revoked.
That sounds like he wanted to expedite the proceedings, and if he is able to be basically formally disbarred, that may affect the timeline of when he can reapply, right? Because if you're under suspension, you're kind of in this limbo until a ruling is made by the Florida bar. So he may want to expedite it and say willingly, I'm agreeing to be disbarred for X amount of time, and then I want to reapply, whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever the case may be. So that could be what's at play here.
According to court documents, Labener would have to wait 5 years to reapply to the Florida bar. But just one day after that application was submitted, officials say he shot his father in a breezeway outside his law firm. Court documents say investigators found the victim lying in a, quote, large pool of blood. Before the shooting, the probable cause affidavit says Brandon Labener rode a bike to his father's law offices. Security camera footage from a property management company caught video of this. Local news stations report Brandon Labener's sister positively identified him as the man in that video. Additional video allegedly shows Labener take a gun out of a box and place it out of view. Pearson says all security video will be used as the investigation continues.
So what prosecutors will be looking at is the weight of the evidence. So the investigation is still ongoing. Our understanding at this juncture was that there's some video surveillance that shows a person sort of hiding, laying in wait for someone, and then an altercation ensued. It does not sound like the actual homicide itself is on video, but the aftermath is, as in the person was then found dead, at the scene. So the question is going to be, what other surveillance videos are there in terms of capturing the person coming into the building, leaving the building? Did they talk to anyone? You're going to be looking at cell phone records.
On top of that, Pearson says investigators will comb through bank records and past lines of communication, along with DNA and fingerprint evidence. Court documents show investigators recovered a box for a gun, a lighter, gloves, and a face mask inside Brandon Labener's vehicle. Pearson also says Labener's response after allegedly shooting his father could be a topic of discussion. Labener was arrested about 3 miles away from the crime scene at his law office after barricading himself inside. At the time, Labener had an active warrant out for his arrest for driving under the influence in neighboring Broward County. But Labener refused to speak to first responders about the incident, instead communicating only through his attorney.
I thought of it from the perspective of, you're an attorney. You already know what you've done. And so you know that as a general premise, speaking to law enforcement is not going to go well for you, right? So you already are lawyering up from the beginning because you want to make sure that you don't say anything that's going to further incriminate you and further damage your defense later on down the line. So that to me wasn't particularly odd. The barricading kind of represented either, number one, someone who is in a mental health crisis because of the fact that he's seeing his life spiral out of control and now he's killed his father. Of course, your mind is not going to be in a calm and safe place. So, that could make sense. But also, too, maybe he's just grappling with the fact of what he's done and now is afraid to face the music, face the public, face his family, explain to his family that he killed his own father. Like that's a lot of levels going on there. So I'm not overly stunned that he barricaded himself. But again, barricading yourself never really ends well, which goes back to my first point about being in a mental health crisis, right? Because especially as an attorney, if you barricade yourself as a suspect, you're going to come out one way or the other. And it's likely going to be as a result of SWAT intervention. And that's just not a pleasant way to end your day. So you know what the outcome is going to be. There's no question. There's no escaping. There's no discussion of that. So still choosing to barricade yourself while knowing all of these facts tells me that he was not in a good mental state.
But Pearson says the question of Labener's mental health status doesn't mean he's off the hook for the alleged murder. She compares his crime to the disgraced South Carolina attorney and now convicted murderer Alec Murdaugh.
Now, does that take away his culpability for what he may have done that day? Not necessarily. We need to look at the totality of the evidence and, see if mental health really did play a part of all of this, or was it addiction? I mean, these are all things that will come out over the course of the investigation and potentially a trial. All I would say is that, it is always very tragic when you see an attorney wrapped up in a situation like this, because again, you're afforded a lot of the privileges that the average person isn't. And you are also afforded a bird's eye view into what our system looks like. While you may not be necessarily a criminal attorney, you may be focused on, personal injury or, civil rights or other areas of law, you still have some understanding on how the system works. So to find yourself, much like Murdaugh, when you find yourself on that other side of the courtroom, it's definitely, very jarring and very shocking. I just hope that the family can find peace and healing and closure, because that's going to be tough, losing both the father, the patriarch of the family, and then losing a son. These two people are being lost in this whole situation, on top of the effect that it'll have with, direct the kids of, let's say, if the defendant has kids, his kids, the father's kids, all of that. I mean, there's just so many ripples of pain that we're seeing in this situation. So I'm just hopeful that the family does find some closure.
Pearson says because Labiner is charged with first-degree premeditated murder, he could face the death penalty in the state of Florida. Right now, he's being held without bond at the Palm Beach County Jail. He's due back in court on August 1st. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.